Hello and welcome to our webinar, The SEG Blind Spot, Closing the Gaps in Your Email Security. I'm Megan Billingsley and I'll be your moderator today. Before we begin, just a few quick housekeeping notes. The slides will advance automatically. To enlarge the slides, click the Enlarge Slides button in the top right-hand corner of your menu. And if you need tech help, click the Help widget. And of course, please submit questions throughout the session and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. Today, we'll discuss why many organizations are reassessing the role of their legacy secure email gateway, or SEG, in a modern email security strategy. SEGs long played a critical role in blocking spam, malware, suspicious links, and known bad indicators. But modern email attacks increasingly look like normal business communication. They often lack the obvious malicious indicators legacy tools rely on, creating a blind spot around identity, behavior, and trust. Joining us today is Elizabeth Cahan, Product Marketing Manager at Abnormal AI, along with Brian Klenke, Chief Information Security Officer with Bath & Body Works. Elizabeth, could you briefly introduce yourself for our audience?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. My name's Elizabeth. I'm a product marketing manager at Abnormal AI, and my background's in developing and evangelizing AI-powered solutions for enterprise security and resilience. So I'm really excited to be here with you all today and talk about how email attacks are changing and what this means for modern email security needs.
Excellent, thank you. And Brian, could you introduce yourself as well?
Sure, happy to. I too am glad to be here today, and in the retail industry at Bath & Body Works today, but I have a long history with defense and intelligence missions prior to this, so this is a little bit different role for me, but the experiences I've gotten, facing nation-state actors have translated in a very interesting way into combating cybercrime and consumer-based, cyber attacks.
Fantastic. Well, thank you both for taking the time to be with us today. With that, let's get started with how email threats have changed. Elizabeth, why are organizations reassessing their email security strategy right now?
Yeah, so what we're seeing is that legacy secure email gateways, or SEGs, were built for a very different threat landscape than what exists today. So they were designed to stop things like spam, malware, suspicious links, malicious attachments, known bad senders, basically anything with an obvious red flag attached to it. And for a long time, that worked. But many of the most effective email attacks that we're seeing today are designed specifically to avoid these obvious signals. So they're using clear links, trusted infrastructure, familiar workflows, compromised accounts, and language that feels normal in a business context. So the attacker's advantage today is more about abusing identity, behavior, relationships, and trust than dropping something in that just looks obviously malicious.
So when we talk about the SEG blind spot, is that what we mean?
Yeah, exactly. That's the blind spot. And I want to be clear that SEGs are still catching a lot of known threats just fine, but what they can't do is evaluate intent. So they're built to check a message against a list of known bad signals and not ask whether this specific sender in this specific context should actually be trusted right now. So an attack that never trips a single one of those signals sails right through, even if everything about it, once you look at who's involved and what's being asked, is a red flag.
Great, thank you so much. Brian, you've been in security for a long time. Can you help set the scene here? How has this threat landscape evolved over your career?
Yeah, well, as she just said, I think she's spot on. Like the threat landscape has changed. Now, all of the things that threat actors have been doing over the years are still true, but it's and a bunch of other tactics that have piled on, and those original kind of set of tactics have really kind of shrunk with regards to their utilization by threat actors that are serious and a threat to organizations. I think the interesting thing that I've seen is we started out with a lot of indicator-based, very like kind of time-sensitive indicators. Things like IP addresses, things like links that have a static URL, things like that. And a lot of that has changed and has been changing slowly over time. But a big accelerator, I think, has also been like the advent of AI. I mean, gosh, I really wish we had some of the AI tech we have today. Back when I first started this, 20 some odd years ago. But we didn't. So, what we were stuck with, basically looking at each email, the headers, all the indicators, subject lines, the format, the language, we were trying to do this manually, reverse engineering the malware, extracting whatever indicators we could, sandboxing, and then really in a lot of cases, building a defensive strategy that assumed that someone's going to click on this, they're going to open the attachment, and bad things are going to start to happen, malware is going to get installed. A lot of that has changed, where email has kind of taken on a different role in some of these attack patterns. It's still, many of those things are still true in many simple, more simplistic attacks. But I would say that there's a lot of things you have to think about with the advent of automation, with the advent of cloud platforms that look like everywhere else. Amazon is a big space, Azure is a big space, GCP is a big space. The threat actors can rent that space out just like we can. Before it was easier to dial in because they had this one IP address, or this one email, or they typo squatted on a domain, right? And those types of things. But those are very static indicators. And traditionally, to make good use of those things, within our SEG, we would load all those things in, but we would closely track those indicators based on what their longevity was going to be. An IP address is easy to change. An email address is easy to change. So these are things that are really easy to change, so you can't rely on them for very long. They kind of come with the waves. Now that is just accelerated, today to a much faster and more compressed timeline in the threat landscape. With the leveraging of AI and offensive capabilities, threat actors are able to basically make email addresses that are spelled correctly, have no discernible pattern from one to the next. You can literally instruct AI to build you a phishing campaign where no two emails have anything in common. So that just kind of blows up the whole notion of, I'm going to find an indicator and it's going to carry me through an attack pattern. You got to look at it in a different way. And I think that's what AI, we've been kind of long waiting for this, started into some machine learning tactics over the years that I've played with. But now getting into the full kind of breadth of LLM and its capabilities, it's really unlocked the ability for us to look at this in a very different way than what we've been traditionally doing with SEGs and indicator-based reverse engineering and indicator extraction from emails. And what that allows us to do is focus on behavior, as Elizabeth said. We can really dial in on what is good behavior and what is bad behavior. I had to get to know threat actors really well before. Now I focus a little bit more time on getting to know my users. How do they normally behave? And when they start doing things that are different than that, that's an alert, as opposed to just waiting for the bad thing to happen and hope that I have something that matches it to catch it. So ultimately, the whole model is kind of flipped on its head in that regard with the advent on the offensive side, with the advent of AI, but also with the defensive capabilities that AI brings to us. So that has allowed us to flip it on its head.
Got it. Thank you so much. And Elizabeth, can you share a real-world example of this newer type of attack?
Yeah, for sure. I'll actually walk through quickly 2 real-world attacks that abnormally I recently caught in customer environments, and both of these had already slipped past our customers' legacy SEGs. So the first is a Zoom file share phishing attack. So this one starts with what looks like a routine email inviting you to view a share file. In this case, it's a proposed payment plan. And because it's using real Zoom infrastructure, guard's already down a little because it's a trusted platform and nothing looks off. And once you click, you land on this convincing Zoom Canvas page that looks like a totally normal document. But buried inside that document is a second link, and this sends you through a CAPTCHA screen, which ironically makes the whole thing feel more legitimate before finally landing you on a fake Microsoft sign-in page to steal your credentials. And what really stood out to me about this one is just how many layers between the first email and the actual credential theft. And every single step's designed to lower your guard just a little bit more before the last step. The second attack is a cold call party invite that leads to credential harvesting. So this one showed up as an unexpected special event invitation, which was sent from a free consumer email account like Gmail. So it felt casual and personal instead of corporate. and you click to open it, you're prompted to choose a login method to view the invitation, and that's when it takes you to a lookalike sign-in page built to capture your credentials. And what I found really interesting about this one is it didn't rely on fear or urgency at all. It relied on curiosity, and it's social and non-technical, and that's exactly why it worked. And so what's really the through line with both of these attacks is the email itself looked normal, but that's what made it so effective and why traditional SEGs have such a hard time catching them.
Yeah, I can imagine. Elizabeth, are there any trends or data points that show why this is becoming more urgent?
Absolutely. The urgency here is really showing up in the data. So for instance, the 2026 Verizon data breach investigation report recently found that the human element is involved in 62% of breaches. So we're talking about the majority of breaches tracing directly back to a person. And then the FBI's 2025 internet crimes report backs this up too, noting that 85% of all losses now come from cyber-enabled fraud attacks that exploit human behavior. And they actually found that the average business email compromise, or BEC, incident loss is around $123,000. And anecdotally, when I talk to CISOs, they're telling me the same thing. Both the volume and the sophistication of phishing and BEC attacks are climbing.
Incredible. Thank you. Brian, did this kind of attack pattern line up with what your organization was seeing?
Absolutely. I mean, we've certainly seen one of each, and certainly various variants of each of those, among others. And I think that as Elizabeth pointed out, I mean, legacy SEG often had trouble detecting those things as they're coming in the front door, just because of the dynamic nature of them, because they're using kind of common and benign kind of platform to harvest credentials. There's no malware delivery to catch. There's no, it's literally just tricking a user to going to a place and just giving up their credentials. And all along the way, the bad guys are credentializing themselves with things like CAPTCHAs and really like modeling your SSO pages or Microsoft's SSO pages or Google, So these are all things that people interface with every single day. So it's very commonplace to, get one of these emails, click a link, and the attackers know this and they're taking advantage of this, of course. So, just given the routine nature of those, DocuSigns, other, all manner of things that are part of your everyday are leveraged in these things, which ultimately, drives back to, what Elizabeth and I were kind of discussing in the first question, which was, really around, it flips the model on its head. You can't really go about it in the same way that you have been. It doesn't mean that everything that you're doing in your legacy SEG environment is bad or wrong. It will still catch some stuff. It is just not unto itself, like, in a position to meet today's threat landscape based on some of the examples that Elizabeth stated, or some of the things that you would read in the like things like the Verizon breach report. So.
Exactly. Thank you. Elizabeth, how does behavioral AI approach email security differently?
Yeah, so the fundamental shift is that behavioral AI starts by learning what normal actually looks like across an organization. So it means identities, relationships, how people typically communicate, who your vendors are, what your workflows look like, your login and account behavior. And once it has this behavioral baseline, it can spot when something's unusual or suspicious, even if the message doesn't contain a known bad indicator. So the message may be technically clean, nothing flagged, nothing broken, but contextually it's just way out of place. So instead of asking, does this message contain something we already know is bad? It asks, does this look normal for this environment? And that's a completely different question, one that legacy tools were never built to ask.
And how does this fit with native email security?
Yeah, it fits really well. Honestly, I think that is an important point to make. So Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace already provide a strong built-in security foundation against a wide array of threats at scale. They have capabilities like threat intelligence, signature-based detection, payload analysis, link and attachment analysis, broader platform-level controls, and these capabilities aren't going anywhere, and they're doing really the heavy lifting on known threats. But here's the thing, a legacy SEG is built to do the same job these native security tools also do. So organizations that are keeping legacy SEG around are often paying twice for overlapping protection. And on top of that, legacy SEGs often need mail flow routed around native controls just to function in the first place. It's not that the legacy SEG's doing something wrong, it's that most of the time there's nothing it's catching that native security isn't also capable of catching. But then what behavioral AI adds, it's different. So it's coverage for attacks that neither the legacy SEG nor native security was ever designed to text or ever designed to catch. Things like text-only social engineering, compromised vendor invoice fraud, suspicious internal mail, account takeovers. So a way to think about it is native security handles the broad foundation, and then behavioral AI provides complementary protection for attacks tailored to your specific organization that evade traditional inspection.
Perfect. Thank you. Brian, what changed for your organization in terms of threat detection after introducing Abnormal?
Abnormal allowed us to get, I think, ahead of or further up in the kill chain, harking back to my defense contractor days, so I have to mention the cyber kill chain at least once in a conversation. But I think, from a cyber kill chain perspective, we're always trying to move upstream, to detect earlier, block earlier, disrupt earlier, whenever we possibly can. And because of the shift of, how the threat actors were, shifting their tactics, and the SEG's not able to kind of keep up with and those types of tactics, not really, they weren't really designed to detect those types of things, really, to be honest. I mean, they were built to solve a different problem. Adding in, Abnormal allowed us to bring AI behavioral modeling to bear on the same, email traffic patterns, and we were able to catch a lot more stuff earlier. So a lot of, prior to that was around, hey, if we don't catch it, we're going to detect it at, further later in the kill chain. So that might be EDR alert goes off, and then we have to go have cleanup processes to go clean it up. And we got really good at that over the years, right? If somebody, an email would get through, somebody click the link, they'd make a mess of their laptop. The bad guys might try to get a foothold, but we quickly pounced it, but we'd have that cleanup work to do. But then we'd have to go and figure out who else got that. And we'd have to spider out, and it was this wash, rinse, repeat, respond cycle that we were kind of trapped in for many, many years. The behavior piece, being able to add that in, allowed us to move a good portion of that upstream in the kill chain, which honestly meant less cleanup later for us. That's that from an end result. It also meant a lot less work around the threat intelligence that we had to do to basically catch stuff on a bad list. Now it's really more of this is what good looks like. Anything that deviates is deemed suspicious, so we can kind of attack the problem on its head from that perspective. So it dramatically changed that profile, and in a lot of ways, it's not that we, and I would say a lot of companies were, as a community, we're pretty good at catching email, but we work really hard to catch bad emails, right? And I think that's one of the things that that we've been able to do with a tool like Abnormal in our arsenal. It's really enabled us to take the fight upstream, to really compress the time it takes for us to respond, prevent, disrupt, and a lot less time and resources involved in the cleanup and aftermath of those types of things. So it's dramatically changed the game for us.
Yeah, sounds like quite the difference maker there. Elizabeth, detection is clearly critical, but what operational burdens can legacy SEG environments create?
Yeah, so beyond detection, legacy SEG environments can create a lot of drag for security teams. So if you manage one, you know the pain points. There's complex policy management, there's constant tuning and maintenance, way too much time spent triaging false positives. And all this is pulling time and energy away from higher value work that security teams should actually be doing.
And how can behavioral AI help here?
Yeah, so behavioral AI can cut down on this load. And the reason is it's because it's not relying on static rules that need constant babysitting in the first place. So it's just continually learning and adjusting on its own. So the system just needs a lot less hand-holding to stay accurate over time. And that's what actually drives the automation and fewer false positives and remediation that is able to happen without someone manually stepping in.
And Brian, how did this show up for your team?
Yeah, so Elizabeth is spot on. I mean, this showed up, in very practical and very immediate ways for us. I can say, so just practically speaking, we had 4 to 5 people managing our SEG, our legacy SEG, full time, and basically managing those static rules, to, looking through false positives, to tune those, to tune that set, looking for new stuff to put into the rule set, and then just the care and feeding around that. Additionally, I think it's worth pointing out that it also added a lot of additional complexity in our mail flow that we just had to live with, because we needed to route all the mail through our SEG first, then push all the mail over to Microsoft, because we're a Microsoft shop, like most folks are out there probably listening. And so it added a hop in there, and then you're dealing with rules on the SEG, flow rules on the and Microsoft, and so it was quite a symphony to choreograph. Let's just put it that way. What the ability to get AI in the middle and abnormal in the middle of this was, it allowed us to eliminate a hop. So yes, I eliminated my legacy SEG. That immediately freed up 4 resources from full-time staring at SEG I was able to redeploy them to actually more valuable security work throughout my organization, which means they get cooler work to do on a day-to-day basis. So that's a great value prop for my security team, who is, as anybody knows, the talent is hard to come. Good talent is hard to come by and maintain. So anytime you can improve their jobs, that's great. But if you think about that, like 4 to 5 people's worth of work, and that's not even counting like my email team. So I also have, the infrastructure part of the organization, and email itself, like not the security piece, but the actual just email delivery piece is also part of that thing. So you really have these 2 teams, and then, putting a lot of resource into troubleshooting between, our true mail gateway, Microsoft, and our SEG, and trying to deconflict issues with mail routing or who's blocking where. And so all of that just kind of went away immediately. We were able to basically put abnormal in as a bolt-on, as a kind of a better together story with, the O365 environment, and having that be able to just plug right into that without creating additional hop, without creating additional complexity, without creating an additional rule set that you got to deconflict with the right hand and the left hand. So immediately, the reliability of our mail platform and mail flows improved, because we reduced complexity. So that's great. But then also from a security perspective, we were really able to drive down risk, because we were spending a lot more time just focused on behavior and what is good user behavior and what is suspicious user behavior. And to the point where now I went from a team of 4 people watching it to, my email team still does their email thing. But I mean, basically, I have a part-time of 1 resource that kind of monitors it, makes sure that it's working correctly. Honestly, just checking in to make sure that it's not screaming at us, and really to pull reports and things like that. Ultimately, for me, so it's really had a substantive impact on how we resource our team and where we apply our energy. And I always like it when we can kind of solve a problem and move on to the next problem, because there's plenty of problems to solve. So there's no point in just beating your head against the wall with something that you can make a lot easier.
Yeah, well said. Thank you. Elizabeth, we've talked about how attackers are changing their tactics. Recent Gartner research found that most CISOs believe phishing and BEC attacks have become both more sophisticated and more frequent. So as these threats become more dangerous, how should security teams think about whether their SEG is still necessary?
Yeah, so I tell them to ask one question, which is my SEG catching attacks that native email security can't already catch, or is it just duplicating coverage that's already there? And this distinction matters more than ever. Like Brian previously mentioned, attackers now have AI and other widely available tools that let them move faster and more convincingly. So the real question isn't whether your SEG still works, it's whether it's adding protection native tools can't already provide, or just adding cost and complexity.
Makes sense. Thank you. Brian, what advice would you give to existing abnormal customers who are considering whether to displace their third-party SEG?
Yeah, I think, a couple of points that I would make there. Number one, I'm a firm believer, and you have to start from the threat actor. What is the threat actor doing? Not what are you capable of? You have to start there because you don't know if you're solving the right problem if you don't understand the problem you're trying to solve. So spend time to get to know what are the tactics of the threat actor. So Elizabeth gave a couple of great examples from like the Verizon breach report and other places. I would say, continue to be students of the threat actors. You need to understand how they're operating and what they're leveraging, to accomplish their mission. So that's kind of point number one, is starting from there. I think the other thing, as far as when you start to think about displacing SEG, is I would say test it. Run them in parallel. That's what we did. It didn't take us very long to do either. I mean, you capture 30 days worth of data, maybe even a couple of weeks. You're going to know pretty quickly. I mean, you're going to see what your SEG was catching, what the behavior is going to catch. So we ran them kind of in parallel, as we were doing the implementation. So it was a nice smooth motion as far as from an implementation perspective. But ultimately, we were able to see very quickly, like, hey, this stuff is all coming through our SEG. Abnormals picking it up, abnormals, eating it effectively. And that was literally the proof that we had when we kind of started to look statistically and historically across, our SEG reporting. You really see that it's not really catching anything that abnormal wasn't going to catch in the first place, just simply because, abnormal's not necessarily catching it because it matched an IP address. The SEG will catch that, sure, but if they change the IP address, what are they doing? That's what abnormal is going to catch. What is the intent? How is it different in the way that they're communicating with your user than what that particular user traditionally does? I mean, imagine trying to profile every single one of your users' behavior kind of in some sort of a manual way and write a rule set for them. That's not even a problem you can solve as humans manually. This is why AI is cool. It's like we're really glad it finally got here. There's been a promise of AI for many, many years, and we're there. And so that's like, it really is delivering it for security use cases in these types of ways. I think that are really big. But I would say ultimately, test it out. Design some tests. Give yourself the confidence. I will tell you, I went through it with my team. Let's also not forget that like O365 is also a SEG, right? That is of its own, right? And if you're a Microsoft shop, even if you're a Google, but if you're a Microsoft shop, let's just start there, leave it there, is, you're already managing one SEG. So technically, if you got another SEG, you're managing two SEGs. Now, so you really compress that down. You can still do some of those manual things in Microsoft environment if you really feel like you need to. But I think the bigger thing is like, don't test on data, not on feelings, not on what you've always been doing. Be willing to challenge the status quo and say, hey, is there a better, easier, smarter way to do this that's more effective and matches the threat landscape today? Or am I still trying to solve a problem of yesterday? And I think that's a big thing, from an advice perspective, is if you're going to need to get confidence and let go of the past, you're going to have to probably test and give yourself some data to do that. But go ahead and do that. It will bear out. You will see where you'll see that it's a different approach, it's a different threat, and this is much more well designed for today's threat than what SEG was trying to solve yesterday.
Great advice. Thank you. Elizabeth, what should teams know about deployment and transition?
Okay, so I know SEG displacement can sound intimidating at first, but the transition should be practical and manageable. Modern email security platforms should be designed to deploy quickly with minimal disruption. So Normal, for example, is dedicated resources and teams whose whole job is supporting customers through the transition. And this should feel like a guided modernization effort and not like ripping out a critical control, just hoping for the best.
Excellent. Thank you so much. As we're nearing the end of our time, it does look like we'll have some time for a few questions from our audience. But before we do that, here's a few key ideas just to take with you today. Legacy SEGs were built for a different class of email threat. Modern attacks increasingly exploit identity, behavior, and trust. Behavioral AI helps detect attacks that lack traditional red flags. And security teams should reassess whether their SEG still delivers differentiated value, especially in the age of AI-enhanced attacks. All right, so we do have some time again for some of those audience questions. Our first one here, Brian, I'm going to go ahead and send to you. What's the actual difference between fighting proactively and fighting reactively in practice? Because it sounds good in theory, but what does it look like day to day?
Yeah, I think, this goes back to the intelligence conversation that, we started out with. I think ultimately, if you're a student of the threat actors, reactively is what we have had to do for probably better part of a decade and a half of my career, at least in the 20 plus years I've been there. It's kind of been about 15 years or better. Is basically, yeah, you're chasing attacks that already happened, right, in the past, and you're hoping that the threat actor doesn't change anything and attacks you with that same thing, so you can catch them if they're going to attack you, right? That they don't try something new. So there was a little bit of a herd immunity that, in many of the different industry ISACs, where it's like, hey, we were tight knit, we were reporting what we were seeing, because if you were the first, you probably got popped. But the second guy who got that attack, or the third security team that got that attack, they were okay, because the first organization that got popped reported that, and so the herd survived. But sorry if you were the one that got picked off, right? You're the first one in. This really changes it, I think. That's a reactive approach, right? Where you're hoping to get, and you're studying the past and hoping that predicts future results, which financial advisors always tell you, with disclaimers, that that's not a thing. So it's true in security as well. Like, you're much better fighting in a position where you're not looking at how did they attack organization X yesterday. You can say, how do they behave today, currently, in a modern way? These are the things they do, not the stuff that they use, or the places that they do it from. It's really more, how do they act? What are their actions? And we can look at those actions and even flip that on its head. What does a normal user act like? And I can compare action and behavior against a normal baseline. And that means I don't have to predict what the next IP address that they're going to use is, or the next typo squatting domain that they're going to use is. I don't have to catch that out in the wild. I don't have to collect that intelligence. What I can do is say, I know my users. I can study them. I can record data on them. They get emails all the time. I can see what the patterns are. Who do they interact with? All those types of things. The AI figures all that out on a per user basis, and then it maps that against incoming behaviors, and it says, do these match or not? So now I'm in a position to be predictive, in that, hey, this behavior is weird. It's probably not good. I'm not going to allow it. I don't have to fully understand it before I can take an action on it. That is the substantive difference between reactive, which is I have to fully understand exactly what I'm trying to catch before I can actually take an action, versus a behavior-based approach, which allows me to take a preemptive action on something that looks out of the ordinary. And that is a big advantage for the defender when you can do that.
Excellent. Thank you. Our next question asks, we've had a SEG in place for years without major incident. Isn't that proof that it's working? Brian, do you want to take this?
I would say, yeah, I would not say that's proving a negative, for one. So I would say that, the absence of an incident is either means, yes, maybe it's working, or maybe you just haven't found the breach that you have going on yet, and threat actors are still there. So I think you always have to be in a assume breach position as a CISO. I think you have to assume that's going to happen, and I think that is, then you build your capability around that. But ultimately, any opportunity you get to push forward on up the kill chain, you take that the second you get it. Right, that's what I've kind of learned, is just there's a big attack surface. Email's one piece of that attack surface. If I can push email up the kill chain, a long ways, in a dramatic way, that's good for me, because it allows me to redirect, my resources and my attention elsewhere, where I'm not as far up the kill chain, and I'm further back on my heels with regards to where I'm having the fight. I do think that you really have to question constantly, your approach, because the threat actors are doing the same. They're seeing what works, what doesn't work, and they'll run with something that works until it doesn't, then they'll try a different thing. You got to be the same in security. That's I think one of the things that that I would challenge anyone who's saying, "Well, my seg's working, and if it ain't broke, don't fix it." Sure, I think that may be a dangerous view to have. Honestly, I think you should be really challenging every piece of your security program to make sure that it's current and relevant to today's threats, and those change continuously. So it almost would say odds would be against you that the thing that you put in 10 years ago would be relevant to the threats today, because 10 years of, I mean, just statistically, that doesn't seem, as fast as this pace move, that doesn't seem likely. So you really need to question those things. I would challenge you to say, how would you prove that the SEG is working, right? How do you know you're not just missing stuff because of the SEG? Because it's an antiquated way of approaching it. It's an antiquated intelligence model. Like, that would be my challenge, is how would you get comfortable with that as a CISO? I think you need to think through that more closely.
Yeah, great points. Thank you. Elizabeth, we got one for you here, and it asks, so does this mean native email security isn't needed anymore?
Yeah, so no, not at all. Native security is still really important. So Microsoft and Google provide a lot of built-in email security capabilities on their own, but what these behavioral AI solutions like Abnormal add are behavioral context for the attacks that require a deeper understanding of identity, relationship, and intent. So the right way to think about it is it's not either or, it's complementary protection.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I think we've got time for one more. And Brian, this is a good one for you. Some people hear we reallocated headcount and worry that this is really just about cutting jobs with AI. How do you push back on that?
Well, first and foremost, I'd push back very heavily on the notion of that happening in cyber. What my team found is, like, no one was let go. I had 4 people that I could free up to do more interesting work, frankly, and put them and make them more battle effective, right? Because I can apply those smart people in ways that I hadn't had the opportunity to do that. Maybe I'm not getting an increase in headcount, because of cost constraints or whatever. I mean, everybody hears, everybody lives through these things all the time. So maybe I can't hire some more people. So then you have to get creative as a CISO and say, how do I take the existing people and stretch them further? Well, if I can get them out of doing certain things because I know I have that covered with technology, I can reallocate them to places and get that increase in headcount. I think that's the other thing is, that I really want to foot stomp. This didn't replace jobs. It really just changed what I need, what the work that was needed to be done. I mean, I guess if you just love managing a SEG and that's all you ever want to do, and right, like, then maybe that is a challenge for you. But like, I don't find that to be realistic. And cyber talent is very fungible. These are, generally speaking, just by nature of the work, it's a problem solving, critical thinking, analytic driven, scientific method kind of a group and mindset, and those skills easily and quickly translate into wearing other hats, and in most cases, that's what keeps people. I look at it as like, it didn't cut jobs. It actually probably allowed me to retain talent, because you're not burning people out on the same thing over and over every day for years, right? And just hope they never want to do anything different. This allowed me to move people into something more exciting and effectively retain high-end talent that's hard to get.
Excellent perspective. And I think that that's a great place to end for today. So thank you to Elizabeth and Brian for sharing your insights. And of course, thank you to everyone who joined us. Don't take your email security stack for granted. Ask what each layer is really buying you against today's identity and behavior-based attacks, and what it's costing you to keep it. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great day.